Alova, can you hear me?
Yes,
Okay.
loud and clear.
Okay, we're just waiting for Sana. Oh,
Bula ala, bula lani.
can you see what they're putting on the Zoom chat? Can you see the messages? Okay, set, because that's where the questions will come. Eh? We're just waiting for Sana. Good luck.
Yeah.
Okay. Go back to Zoom.
It's going to wait. Interesting.
No, everybody else is in. Okay, maybe we begin and I'll try and get her on. Yeah?
Bulaknaka, everyone, can you hear me? Yes, all right. Nissan Bulaknaka brothers and sisters, tuning in to the second Changing the Story webinar series. My name is Francis Namomo, and I will be moderating the session today for this exciting youth panel. Two of the panelists in the room with me. This Changing the Story webinar series is part of a regional Reweaving the Ecological Map initiative that is jointly implemented by the Oceania Center for Arts, Culture, and Pacific Studies of the University of the South Pacific, the Pacific Theological College, and the Pacific Conference of Churches. Again, I welcome everyone who is tuning in from Fiji, the region, and across the globe. Bulavinaka. Hello, everything. Spirituality is key to our lives, our communities in the Pacific and around the world, especially with indigenous communities. In many Pacific communities, spirituality is integral to our well-being, which is understood to be where we find harmony and balance of these elements, the spiritual, the social, and the physical. As young Pacific Islanders, sometimes our spirituality is centered on our connectedness to God, connected to the natural environment and resources, and our connectedness to one another. In the first webinar series, our matuas talked about some aspects of spirituality that I find a familiar subject with our young people, highlights of the relationality, the interrelatedness and interconnectedness with one another, the honua, whenua, our ocean, a deep sense of belongingness, whether you're in the Pacific or part of the diaspora community, there's always this belongingness to where you are. And of course, the importance of our language that breathes life, encouragement, and nurtures our people. these are some of the aspects that we must acknowledge to allow us to navigate our Nkua, our Baka, forward during these difficult times. So today, ladies and gentlemen, we have a really exciting group of young people who will be speaking on the topic, Pacific spirituality and philosophy and its implications on development. Joining us for the Talanoas today, we have Alisi Rambukawanga Nandewa. Alisi is from the Boer province in Fiji. She graduated from the University of the South Pacific with a bachelor's in marine science and has for the last 10 years worked passionately in the area of environment conservation as well as climate activism and indigenous peoples, traditional rights and knowledge advocacy. Dolbinandrio. We have Mahima Ba'ai. She is of Samoan descent and is currently enrolled in the climate change postgraduate program at the University of the South Pacific. Growing up in a cultural background, she was constantly taught by her parents on the mana, the land holds, and the importance of respecting it in order to maintain a harmonious balance. These teachings were what had birthed her interest in environmental conservation. And as years went by, her passion grew as she became more involved in volunteering and awareness programs. Mahima is the current president for WWF Pacific Volunteering Program and tries to get involved in youth empowerment programs as much as possible. She strongly believes that Pacific youths hold an influential role in leading their communities to a future that safeguards the livelihoods of our Pacific people. She's currently working as the ecumenical enabler for the Pacific Conference of Churches stewardship program and believes this position is critical as it ensures regional member churches play their part in steering their people into advocacy works around climate action. She knows how powerful the voice of the church is in changing the Pacific narrative, which is why she feels inspired to work as a young advocate for stewardship in our Pacific church communities. Welcome, Mahima. Thank you. Our third panelist is Maina Tali Afua. Talofa, Maina.
Yo, Talofa, Namomo.
Mr. Maina was born and raised in Vaitupu, Tuvalu. Because of his strong link to his community and his people, Maina continues to be the voice for his community and his beloved country, Tuvalu, on the issue of climate justice and indigenous issues at the United Nations and at the regional level. Mr. Talia was amongst the very few Pacific brothers and sisters who were highly involved in the UNFCCC, local communities and indigenous peoples platform from its infancy stage, adoption, and its operationalization. He's currently a full-time PhD candidate at the Charles Sturt University, researching on the issue of climate justice and tuakoi, neighbor, from three trajectories: Muna o Te Whale, indigenous knowledge, biblical, and the geopolitics of climate change. And our final panelist is Miss Susana Lepaoseo, the 21-year-old Samoan woman. She lives with her family in Pula Theological College. She's a student at the University of the South Pacific doing a BA double major in politics and geography. She's deeply interested in nature and its intrinsic values, passionate about helping others in our environment, its security and sustainability, and living and fighting not only for the ecological, but also the human rights crisis we are currently facing with climate change. Her hopes for the future is to see our people stand together with our countries as a region and globally in understanding why our islands are unique and why we should protect them. Her perception of development in the transformation from cash-centered driven economy towards a sustainable development that values our biodiversity. She urges everyone to inspire, engage, implement, transform ourselves towards the conservation of our environment because it protects us, it is our moral obligation, it is a way to give back to our planet and a way to give to our future generations. Welcome to our panelists. So this is how our Talanoa session will roll out today. We will have two leading questions Then I will give time for our panelists to answer these two questions. Then we'll have time for question and answers. If you do have burning questions and you would like to direct it to one of our panelists or to the panelists as a whole, you can use the chat to pose your questions, or raise your hand and we will respond to each one of you. We will begin with the first question to our panelists. What would your new story of development look like given the realities of our people today in the region? I repeat the question again. What would your new story of development look like given the realities of our people today in the region? I'll ask Maima maybe to begin to respond to the question.
So to me, when talking on spirituality, there's a realization that there is an unseen world that goes beyond what our eyes can physically see. It's like the lens that we use to see beyond the physical appearance of materials, and knowing that there's value to what we can't see. Take, for example, when looking at unused spaces within land, especially, unused spaces within land, usually a Eurocentric development narrative, when they see this land or this unused space, they'll define that space as being empty. And when actually it really isn't. So in my father's village in Savai, his paternal side owns this piece of land, and which is traditionally named Bale. And in Samoan, Bale means to rest. So with that land within Sakawa, there's a belief that this space is the last resting place of the spirits before they move to the neighboring village in Buotu in Whalealupo, where there's two portals that where the two portals to the underworld are located. Yeah, so with this land, it's really interesting because with the land, Lepale, you can actually see that you can see it as a connecting space between us humans and our spiritual ties to our ancestors. And it's a great example of how an unused space is not actually empty for us Pacific Islanders. It actually has life and meaning to us and allows us to connect to our ancestral ties. So to me, any piece of land or an unused space can be seen as being empty when looked at through a Eurocentric, or how I would call it, a single colored development lens when looking at it. But then when you look at it through a multicolored lens, you'll actually see that that unused space or that empty space isn't actually really empty. The land, so the land isn't empty, and it doesn't just stop to what is physically appeared to our eyes. There's actually more to it, and there's so much life and meaning to that unused or empty space of land, and that's what allows us to value that space. So taking us back to the word that I had used on multicolored, I used this word in my vision that I had written for REM on trying to rethink ecology for a new normal. And what I had explained this term to be is that a multicolored or a multi-stranded worldview is a worldview that is inclusive of multiple relationships and a wide variety of colors, from like humans to our land, our oceans, and so forth. The worldview allows us to see the beauty in the diversity of God's creation, where these multiple relationships are shared and are seen as equals. In it, we see our environment as kin and relative, and it's what really grounds us to care and render it with much respect, which creates that harmonious balance. So for me, that's what my new story of development would look like. Adopting in a multicolored or multi-stranded view or lens, which is really similar to how our ancestors had lived out their life-affirming ways back then. You know, this kind of worldview challenges us to reframe our development story. And through this lens, we are able to value the holistic well-being of our communities rather than the profit-driven agendas that Eurocentric development stories are constantly focused around. Eurocentric development philosophies usually dictate that everything is defined by what is seen. Like what you see is what you get, and there's nothing beyond that, right? This is because they see the earth through a single colored lens or worldview and misplaced lens in which spirituality allows us to value our land. That's why the narrative is so quick to destroy and extract resources, because their mentality is focused on that single-stranded view of things. They see things through a capitalist system, a system that's money-oriented and is usually profit-driven. So trying to bring in a multicolored worldview of things allows us to rethink and challenge ourselves to bring back this notion of a holistic community. That's how I thank you.
Thank you, Maima. You shared some really key thought-provoking issues or relationships that we have with our land. When you mentioned about defiling an empty space maybe to the eyes of an investor or developer, but to us it's a connecting space. It has its value, it carries its value. You talk about a single-stranded view that has been used and we know has failed a lot, and it does not connect with us in most of our indigenous communities in the Pacific, especially when we look at it from a multicolored view that is inclusive of everything beyond, above, and below, which, like you said, creates a harmonious balance. Thank you for that response. Alicia?
Oh man, how do you follow up with that kind of intro? Thank you, Fra. I think I want to start just sort of to frame the ground and introduce myself first. Me sitting here and my views on, this conversation is based around all the influences around me. Maybe Alice, from Boa, me being the daughter of Vilkesa and Salote, who are doctors and nurses, and who my grandparents were as teachers, and also as someone who studied marine science, as someone who has done all these different things, and that has really played a role in how it shaped my views. And I feel like it's important that I share this first before I go into this reliving story of how we look at things, because I feel it's something we all need to do, to really look back at oneself and your identity and where you stand from, and you as a drop in the ocean, how that ripple effects go out and touch on to other things. One thing I really want to talk about is the Vanua, that's such an important conversation, but I also recognize that not every Vanua in Fiji, it's not homogenous. And I think that's the important first thing you need to say, I want to talk about this, but it's not homogenous. It's different across Fiji, across different tikinas, different villages, even from village to village, there are different practices, different understandings of how we function as a community. And when you had introduced, and you also spoke about the Nrua, the mode that we're in, recognizing that, looking back onto our past, there wasn't just one big draw that brought Fijians here. It was waves of migration, waves of cultures and influences that have shaped how we are today. And, then going into this, first identifying who you are and all the things that have influenced you before then looking forward into that conversation of where do we want to move from here. I remember this conversation I had once in Simi Rand. It's quite well known, indigenous cultural practices and all that. And I probably won't explain it well as him, but, he once talked about words, and what it means. And he talked about this word of maimuri and mailu. That's referring to the future and the past. And then he said, for us, when we use the word maimuri is your back. And so you assume that means the past because it's behind you. But in the Fijian language, maimuri means the future. And mailu, liu is front. And you think that because that means the future, but it means the past. And what he explained that when we use those words, what we're saying is that we don't know what's in front of us. So we have our backs to the future. But what we do see is our past, and that's what we learn from, and it's our reference point to navigate as we move forward into the future. And that's where I want to say we really need to start first. And, I'm usually very active on social media, and I see a lot of conversations on Twitter around this, for Fiji, like talking about identity and relationships and where we come from. And it's so beautiful to see that interest and that yearning to want to go back to your center, to your roots. And I think it's beautiful. I think we also need to remember nuances of how your family, your Matangani, how it's going to be unique from others and it's not all the same. And and I'm trying to find the English word for it, it's precious. It's not something for everyone and everything, it's something we share with him. And so while it's great that we have this big open relationship with everyone about this, it's also important to go back within your family, within that circle, and to talk about your identity and your collective at that level. And then that's how it would grow when you talk about development, because for us it's communal, right? Mm-hmm. And when we talk about development, it's not development of the individual, it's development of the family, of the Matangali, of the Yabuse, And when we can go back inside, looking back on our past, trying to navigate the future, and understand this within our Matangali, our Yabusa, we can then begin to map out and navigate where we will go. And, there's a lot of other things at play here. A big conversation around that is the impact of being colonized by the British and how that has impacted on our traditional governance structures. Understanding the difference between all these administrative structures that were put in place, provincially, so that it could, in an attempt to mirror our indigenous structures, so there could be this connectivity and helping our children to understand, they're not the same thing. And you cannot explicitly say the colonizers, the British introduced this, this was our traditional structure, and they tried to help mirror it so that it could work. And then when you can separate that, and then you understand, if there are issues, administrative, where does it fall? If it's within our own families, then this, how do we resolve that so we can grow and move forward? Those are the first things that come to mind. I feel like that foundation is probably where we need to start first, and then we can really go in and tackle those big conversations about land ownership, administrative rights over our lands. If we are the landowners, how are we making decisions? How are we accessing capital to develop our lands? How are these systems working for us or against us? And how do we change those systems so that it recognizes, our indigeneity and how we function? And there's also an aspect of spirituality that we have to consider here, because the church, broadly, denominations, the church also has a role to play in how they came in to our countries, you know, to our Vanuas, and also like change the way we function, you know, the view of spirituality and deities and how that works. And it really needs to be this whole conversation. And while we can have it at this big level, and that's wonderful, this should be more of an encouragement for us to go down to our communities and our families to reweave at that level as well. To start to unpack and unravel all these things and put it back together in a way that now works in the 21st century, because the past is gone, it's there. We're looking back on it, can't change it, but where we're going now, we can. And that's probably a good starting point.
Those, you talked about identity, centering ourselves back, understanding who we are as an Indigenous person, whether you are Itanke, Samoan, Tuvaluan, even our brothers here in Fiji, the Fijians, centering ourselves back, and then understanding, learning from the past in order to navigate to the future. You use a very important wakamarangeti, that we don't, it means that we need to treasure something that is dear or precious to us. And this kind of conversation is something that we need to provide a space for. And I'm very glad that through this project, we are able to have this space for young people to talk about these issues, some of the struggles in trying to understand, but also unpack things that we've experienced, and then looking forward to navigate with our matuas in what we aspire to see the Pacific, or even our homes, our koros, our villages, matangalis, now people to become, or maybe to navigate forward. Thank you again, Alisi, for that. We'll now move to Maina.
Hola, Francis. Well, thank you so much. Yes, thank you so much for the invitation to be part of this important discussion, especially with the youths who are here with us this morning. And I understand that quite a number of people are also watching today. Here in Sydney is around 9 o'clock in the morning. And yes, basically most of the stuff that I was just about to talk about have thoroughly discussed by the two sisters who have been discussing the issue, especially on the, when we talk about spirituality and philosophy, it seems like spirituality is a Christian thing, or it's about the lotu, and philosophy is about the Western understanding of ideologicals and so forth. However, we cannot limit the term spirituality to Christian beliefs or Christian system alone. They extend and transcend boundaries. And it talks about our deity, our own traditional governance, our own traditional way of looking at the world, our cosmological understanding of things. So about my story of reweaving or talking about this new normal, for me, basically, it's nothing new. It's nothing new. It's just the old normal that we are talking about. When the Western missionary came, when the Europeans came into the Pacific, when they invade our space, they told us that we are undeveloped, unpalangi, not like them. And we need to be like them in order for us to develop. The concept or the idea of development comes from the French word, and lob, meaning to break through. It is a military term that once, if I get caught by the military, I need to break through. And if I can break through the boundaries or being captured by the military, it means I'm free. I have the freedom, the liberty. So basically, when we talk about development from the eyes of the colonizer or the Western people, we're breaking through, we're gaining freedom. But that's not what development is all about for us in the Pacific. I will speak specifically from a Vaitupu to Tuvalu understanding of things. When we talk about development, it's not about breaking through. The Western idea of development, when they came and looked at us, they saw us that we are so close to nature. We are so close to the environment. And for them, that's primitive. We need to do away with nature. In order for us to be civilized, to be developed, we need to do away. We have to distance ourselves from nature, from the environment. And that's where exploitations comes in. You know, development, technology, tools, you know, they came with the idea of not just to develop, but to excavate, explore, destroy our environment. So basically, it's not about freedom. We're not gaining freedom. They are destroying our environment. When we talk about human rights, when we talk about development and so forth, we're talking about communal rights. We're talking about collective understanding of things. We don't have that single mindset of looking at, because of me, therefore you are. You know, it's about we, it's about who we are as people, as community. So spirituality and development, or whatever type of philosophy we talk about, it's all about community. It's based on community. It's based on communal understanding of looking at the world, looking at the cosmological understanding of the whole concept of things. So, however, this whole understanding of philosophy, spirituality, culture, and so forth is guided by this principle of shame and disgrace. You know, it's all started from the house. We call it Muno de Fale. Literally means the house of wisdom, or where wisdom begins. You know, nobody in the Pacific live in the street. That's the basic principle that we came. You know, we look after each other. We take care of one another. Basically, there is no poverty in the Pacific. I will speak specifically for Tuvalu. There is no poverty in Tuvalu. It's hardship. We're facing hardship if we start to discuss the issue of GDP and measure those things in terms of monetary values. But basically, it's just hardship from the eyes of the Palangi, because we are unpalangi, therefore we live in different categories. But it's all guided by this principle of shame and disgrace. We always, Francis, you know, you work there, you want to shine. You don't want to bring shame to the family. You don't want to, you don't want to be, sorry for putting you in the spot. You don't want to be corrupt within the church system. Why? Because it will bring disgrace and shame to your family, not to your island, Fiji. It's about you and your family. So wherever we go, it's all about Muno de Fale. It's about wisdom from the house. What are the loads that have been loaded into you from the house? What are the wisdoms that your parents have taught you? You know, so if we can apply that to development as well, you know, we do things not to bring disgrace to the family. We do things, we want to shine. We want to bring pride to our family. That's all. That's the guiding principle. Whatever we do, whether in workplaces, in churches, in community, you know, you have to go. You have to go. No, I have this right because the UN told me about my rights. What rights? You don't have no rights here in the island. It's about community. It's about communal rights, collective rights. You don't have any individual rights. That's according to the Palangi, not to us. So we have to go. We have to shine and do what we have to do and what we have been taught in the family. We call it in Tuvalu, alofa molibo. You know, when you sleep at night on your grandma's hand, arm, and your grandma start telling you all this story about the past, all this old strand of weaving. So we are just weaving in a new context, using those old strands, nothing new. Look at the issue of COVID-19. People are being voluntarily moved from Funafuti, from the capital, to the outer islands. They're being told to move. And now they are back to the island. They start weaving, they start planting, they're back to the way of life. They start come up with this idea of barter system. You can see this Pata Fiji and you can see the Pata Tuvalu on Facebook. These are not new. They're old normal to us. So this new normal is not a new normal. It's an old normal for us in the Pacific. It's nothing new. It's just a way of how we go back and retrieve those old normals, those old strand of weaving. Kaso, we call it kaso. And how do you weave that new mat from those old strand of life in this new context of, I think I covered the whole time for me. Frances, thank you so much. I'll stop here.
Thank you, Maina. You stated correctly, spirituality is not just about lotu. It's more than that, especially in the Pacific, where our spirituality goes beyond just going to church on Sundays, but it's also taking care of our people, our environment, which, like you said, it's the old normal. Nothing is new, it's the old normal, replaying again. That happens to come at this time, a right time for us to look back and see how we should move ahead. You've also stated something quite common in most of our communities in the Pacific, communal ownership of things, of our land, resources. And therefore, when you use the illustration of somebody being asked to lead, asked to take part in a task to do something, it is their responsibility, but given the wisdom from their homes. So each one of us are being blessed with this communal wisdom that we grew up having around us, and whether it's in our own villages, our own clans, or in other places, our foreign land that we may be living in, we still have this belongingness or connectedness to the land and to the people that surround us. You also talked about development, how in the Pacific we see things differently, but we need, and when Christianity came, or when the colonizers came, they tried to define to us how we should live. And so this is a space or time for us to rethink. It has been going for a while now for this conversation. I think now that COVID happened, it has put us at a point where we need to look to a best possible pathway for our communities, not only the Pacific, but also diaspora communities around the world. Thank you, Maina, for that. We'll now have Susanna. Hi, Sana.
Hello. Hi, everyone.
Hola.
Hi, Sana.
Right. So I guess so my story of development is more of a biocentric society or a system. So like this is a system that centers on life. Like this is the kind of development that it considers all life, like not only referring to human lives, but also the environmental life, the life of the fauna and flora species. And we need to consider others as living beings rather than living things. Like in Samoa, I'm not sure if this applies to the other Pacific countries, but in Samoa, even the abiotic factors of the environment are considered living beings. So looking at fire, the rocks, the tides, the soil, everything is considered as living beings, right? So if we look at them as just living things, then they are things that could be easily destroyed. And if we see them as beings, then we are elevating our status. So from my perspective, looking at my country's traditional way of this biocentric system, a Samoan society is basically founded on the family, the ainga, and right. And within this ainga, everything is more or less holistic. Everything is relational. One thing is connected to the other. Not only in the sense of the biological nuclear family, but it also involves the whole extended family. It involves our environment. Similar to other Pacific countries, spiritual and cultural relations to their environment. So within this family, it is in the village, and it is traditionally governed by the Matai system. And like this Matai system, as some or most of us already know, is like basically a connection of entities. It is like a connection of life. So like back then, the reality back then was this Matai system, all the systems within it were integrated. Everything was connected. There was no isolation. There was no particular system. Like, for example, this one Matai system was also Samoa's political system, economic system, the social, the educational, the religious. However, today there is a major shift in things, and like these systems are now separated. And I think these are some of the things that the Pacific countries have in common. We all have our own systems. For example, there's our own political system. We have the parliament, we have cabinet ministers and parliamentarians. We also have a judicial government where we have the lawyers, we have the judges, we even have a police force. And we also now have a new educational system. As I mentioned before, the One Matai system back then was also Samoa's educational system. We learn as we grow. We learn from our communal experiences. We learn from our experiences within our family. We learn from observing. But now we have classrooms. We have certain educational facilities that we are appointed to attend to, and everything is just individualized. And so one of the most changed systems over the years is the economic system. And I guess that has changed as we all know. So in Samoa, the economy is called tamao ainga. And like back then, this translates as the father of the family. So back then, the father stands strong with distributing everything for the family, for the community. And the tamao ainga back then was shared. Everything was shared. There was no profit and loss system. There was no cash economy. There was no trading. And like these are the specific spiritualities and values that we need to revive. And like, for instance, like if there was like a fishing expedition back in the days, like the catch from that fishing expedition will be shared among the family members, amongst the community members. But now there's commercial agriculture, and the catch is sold in local markets for money. Everything is about money. People are fishing the wrong fish species, the wrong size in the wrong seasons. And like when they use drag nets to fish, they're taking everything. But when they just take what they need, and whatever they don't need, and it's all thrown away. And like this whole commercial agriculture selling for money it's not a problem. Well, it's how we are living now. It's the system we are living now, the cash economy. But the problem is people are exploiting our natural resources just in order to gain more and more. This economy, this cash economy, is bringing this new thing within our societies. This greed, the greed of people. Like everyone is striving to get money. Everything is about money, profit, capital, and like the thing is, they're just taking everything, exploiting our natural resources. And all of this is because of the separation of these systems. And if one person is self-centered or greedy, then that person is not considering the other lives. It's not considering the life of other people. It's not considering the lives of the environment, the lives of the plants and the animals. And like we need to use these systems in a way where they could be integrated to sustain and create life. So these systems can be, what we can do is make sure they sustain life. Looking at the political system, we are to make sure we have politicians that create and give life rather than destroy and take life, like not using their positions for their own benefits. And right, also looking at the religious view, for us to for us to like actually go to these churches we are going to, and like it's a new normal for us to go to these certain buildings for worship, then we should take whatever we learn from there and actually practice it outside of church and not just coming out of church. And if the message is about love, why not come out of church and preach love and share love rather than thinking of taking revenge, rather than coming out and gossiping or committing murder and stuff. So these systems are I think these systems is a problem not only because they are revolved around money, also because it has caused a rise of individualism within our societies. As my sister Alice mentioned, it's about communal spirit. So this communal spirit within the systems are lost. There's no more. Everyone is more self-centered. So the systems within our countries, like in Samoa, we call that osiainga. That's like the reciprocal nature, reciprocal caring amongst the people, and like it's no longer practiced as seen because of this cash economy, and the systems are losing its Samoanness. And I think what we should do is use the systems, looking at them in a way where we can sustain life, mostly because our purpose in life is to create life and not destroy life. And our purpose is to give life and not take life. Yeah.
Thank you, Sana. You talked on a lot of important things, rather than referring to species around us, our environment, as living things. They are like us, living beings. You also compared the traditional Matai system in Samoa, as compared to the system that has been developed or brought in to Samoa to be adopted as the development system or civilized system that should be adopted, and how the traditional system actually cared for, recognizes the relationship between people, nature, and how we must sustain it rather than destroying because of this new system that has been brought into our Pacific Island countries, especially in Samoa, the cash economy, that pushes us to gain more profit rather than taking care of our resources, not only for us now, but also for the future generations. You talked about a communal spirit, and this means giving life and creating life rather than taking life, and being individualistic rather than a communal structure or communal living that is common in most of our Pacific Island countries. Thank you very much for those responses. We'll now go to our second question for our panelists. In your new story of development, how would then spirituality and philosophy help to bring that story to life?
Ask that.
Okay.
With me, I feel like spirituality and philosophy, it really plays a huge role when it comes to trying to bring a lot of what our points have been spoken on. Spirituality is the realization and the ability to see what is beyond the material, like beyond what we see every day. So you had, my sister here, Alice, had mentioned on spirituality, indigenous spirituality and Christianity, right? So with spirituality, indigenous spirituality, I feel like with the church identifies or defines indigenous spirituality now as having faith, With Christians, like, they use their faith to fellowship with God, even though they cannot see God, or but they do. They use their faith to have fellowship, to fellowship with God, and that's their belief to it. That same ideology of believing that God's in their midst and in their presence, and that same ideology goes for spirituality. It gives you an access to a dimension of another world, and it allows you to use a multicolored lens, which I had mentioned before, where you see beyond the material and where you see land as more than just an empty space, like what I had mentioned before. Yeah, so with your faith, you're seeing land with so much life, you value it. And from there, that's what births your respect for those empty spaces, right? Take, for example, so when you're going to cut a tree, if you're a random person or if you're a Balangi going to cut a tree, when seeing the tree through a single-stranded view or a single-colored view, you will only see it for its physical appearance and continue on with your work by cutting it down. But then when you're seeing the tree through a multicolored lens, you find out that this certain tree might actually be a mother tree or a hub tree. And then from there, you know why there is value to that mother tree, because it acts as a living powerhouse for the rest of the forest or the neighboring trees. If it's to be cut down, then the whole forest will eventually die shortly after. So through this lens, we see the world as a community, not just the human community, but it's also inclusive of our environment and the spiritual ties it entails with it. And I feel like for me, that's what relationality is all about. I'm sorry. But yeah, going back to like what my sister Sana had mentioned on the systems, and then what my brother Maina had also mentioned on you bringing back the Bada system, going back to the old traditional, our old stranded ways, reweaving back that economy of sharing, and how we see our communities as a relational, holistic community. So with relationality and spirituality, they really go hand in hand, because spirituality functions within this relational community, and it allows you to feel a deep connection to the land, because you know that it has a spirit and it's life in itself, right? So once you begin to relate to the land, you create a mentality where you know how to value it, because you know that it has life. That deep connection you feel to the land births your respect for caring for it. So I'll use the culture of totemism in Fiji as an example. So each province within Fiji, I'm not Fijian, by the way. So I'll try to speak from what I have experienced. So each province in Fiji has a totem that represents their community. And whether it would be like a living creature or a certain plant, that certain totem is respected and cared for because of the spiritual ties that the locals feel that they're connected to, right? They care for that totem because of their deep connection to it and how it has spirit and value to it. In Samoa, this is exactly like in Samoa. We have our turtles in Samoa is called Eni'asa, which means sacred. Sa means sacred, because we believe that our turtles belongs to the gods of Samoa, which from there has birthed our care and respect for the turtles. So our spiritual connection to our land is one that's like crucial for grounding our mentality to see our vanua as part of us. So I had read up on relational hermeneutics, and one of the articles that Rosiana Langi had written on, her article was called Vanua Savi. Sorry if I mentioned it wrong. Savi. Yeah, okay, I'm sorry. So she had mentioned how in Fiji, in order for a community to ensure that a child is connected to the vanua, I'm sorry if I really apologize if I pronounce this wrong, but the Wakalutu Mbutumi Mone ceremony is held on like the 4th night after the child's birth. And the child's umbilical cord is planted usually with a coconut plant or any other plant, or a child's totem plant. And this ceremony is really significant because in the Fijian culture, it's significant in the Fijian culture because it will ensure that the child will always return back to the vanua and has respect for vanua. That same ceremony is also similar to how Samoans, in our Samoan culture, we do exactly the same thing, where we plant the child's umbilical cord in our own whanua or our ele with a certain tree. And then we also have a book just so we know that we are connected to our whanua, right? But then there's also a belief with that when planting your umbilical cord with the plant, if the plant is to bloom, like very well, then that signifies that the child will grow up to be really successful. If the plant dies, then
maybe you just have your work cut out.
Yeah, so
it's just a side.
Yeah. So all of these really show how much the role of spirituality plays in our Pacific cultures. You know, it's what grounds our holistic community, our holistic mentality, where we use a multicolored lens to value and care for our whanua. And care for creation, because we know that there is life beyond what our eyes can physically see when it comes to materials, right? We know it's not just an empty space. There's a spirit to it. There's life to it. There's meaning, so much meaning to it. And that's how we share a relational connection to our own vanua. You know, that's how I see spirituality and philosophy. Bring in the vision of a multicolored worldview and how we can use that to change our development stories within our Pacific, trying to reweave back all our old strands. And also, it also plays a huge role where we should always keep head of this lens and spirituality when we're talking about that. So I think that's my answer to that question.
Wow, oh my goodness, the conversations have been so rich. As I was listening, I was trying to figure, like what thread could I pull up to continue into the second part of, our story of development and how spirituality and philosophy can help bring that story to life. And, I was like, I'm really drawn to what Sana was talking about around animism. Just a very recent topic for me, as recent as this morning, I was chatting with a very good friend of mine, I think she's on Mind Gala, about this topic of animism, how, we view like plants, and things that also have a spirituality to it. And how it connects to, and I guess I want to now connect it, because we're talking about development, I want to now connect it to my work around environment conservation you know, and also link it to the earlier discussion about how we unpack this identity of Alvanmore. Because for us, our land is connected to the sea, you know. There was no separation. You know, this is your land, it goes out to the sea of Golingoli and as far as the horizon. You know, we saw the sea as something that connected us, not something that separated us as islands. And you know, when it comes to the work around really marine conservation, there's, you know, so many tricky bits around that. And even in terrestrial as well, you know, land boundaries, animal migration, all these different things, you know, the uses of this space. And, you know, one thing, you know, one particular story I want to share is we were at a consultation, this was just pre-COVID, just before COVID hit. And it was for the Upper Navua catchment site. So, you know, they have a conservation area there in the Upper Navua area, you know, it's like a water catchment site that they're protecting. And so this workup has been going on for years. So like when we had this consultation, I was at part of it right towards the end. They were like reviewing their strategies and finalizing things and just trying to plug some things into place. And then we had a group discussion at one point. And you know, I think one of the questions, because they were trying to sort of fill in the narrative of the strategy and asking the people from the Vanua who had come down for the consultation, the landowners themselves. And one of the questions was, you know, like, why is it important that we're protecting this space? You know, why do we need to do this? And so I sat there with my butcher paper and my pen, and then I was like, I asked the first question. I was like, okay, so why do you think it's important? And one of the older ladies sitting there, well, actually, our group was really all women. I think we had 2 men join later. And she just turned very simply, and she said in Fiji, and she was like, Matera na nandangase. Kenda na mwene, kenda na dormitango mekira, matera liumai. You know, and like translating that, she was saying that, you know, these plants, these animals that were up there in the Upper Nile catchments, like the biodiversity that they were trying to protect were their elders. You know, like that, you know, like how she has already connected her spirituality as an indigenous to this, you know, isolated spirituality of God and Christianity and the protection of the environment, you know. I mean, like, it was so beautiful just to hear that and saying that she reviewed these plants, and that's like, they were created first. They were here before us. They're our elders. And we need to protect them. It's part of our duty, you know, as stewards. And, you know, that was so beautiful to hear. I was like, oh man, you know, like, I really, really loved what she shared. And then a couple of weeks ago, I was at this other consultation, and I sat next to a marine biologist, Dr. Austin. He works out in the West. And then we were just discussing tambus, you know, how you have a marine protected area. And we were talking about all these different ways you have a tambu. Some are just for 100 nights, some are permanent, you know, all these scientific methodologies. And then he mentioned about an island out in, you know, I think it was out in the Maneuvers. And he mentioned how, oh, did you know that out there they have a particular reef site that's completely tambu? No one is supposed to fish there ever. They say it's a spiritual place, it's protected, and you're never allowed to go and fish there. And if you look at it through that lens, you know, it's like the spirituality of protecting the place. But if you look at it through a scientific lens, our ancestors were already practicing no-take permanent areas long before it became a thing in academia. You know, it was never recorded, but it was there. And because they had a place that was permanently protected through their own spiritual belief systems, that was the process of enforcement and, you know, telling people, okay, this is how we value this space, this is how we look at it, and we protect it this way. And they ensured that the area would always continue to have fish. You know, the connection of this spirituality with how you're developing a place. And I was just like, oh my goodness, it was so beautiful. I'm like, we need, I don't know, part of me just like, we really need to document this more.
Yeah.
You know, and I guess you can probably tell, I talk about this with a lot of people because I keep referencing people all the time, another set of friends of mine, talking about how we can, you know, get stories about the Pacific, about our countries, that's for our countries, for the Pacific, and written by Pacific Islanders, you know, through our lens, you know, not through this foreign lens, but how we view the world and how we view everything around us. And, you know, like, maybe that's another thing that we can also go into, because there's so many of these beautiful examples that are in existence out there, and we talk about them. And if there was probably a place where we could document it, or be there and easy to access, you know, at the same time also recognizing that there are things that are not necessarily to be written and shared, but trying to navigate, you know, those nuances and ensuring that people understand there are already these things that are within our culture, that are within our practices. And how do we take that? And as we talk about this story of redevelopment, and along with what Maina had said, no, it was already there, it was already being practiced. It's sort of maybe a refresher course. Right. Reintroducing that and helping us to realize when we start by going back into identity, all the things that are already there, the strong foundations that have been built over 3,000 years, you know, in this place, in this in the Pacific. That's wow.
Thank you, Lisi. So we're moving from a Western human-oriented Christianity, this is just from hearing the two panelists, to reclaim a Christian theology that is creation-oriented, which resonates well with Pacific indigenous spirituality. It has been there. We just need to revive or to reconnect. And this needs to be shared with our people. We need to talk about this more. Maina,
Thank you. Thank you to my two sisters who have been discussing the issue in front of before me. But basically, I just want to add some few points, especially of going back to the Muna de Fale, or the wisdom of the house, as the foundation of different values that we are talking about. You know, all the values in the Pacific are not taught outside the house. They are taught in the house, traditional house, those small huts. You know, there is a saying in Tuvalu, "Muna e umaitua de fale ne muna pelo." What wisdom that's passed through outside the house is a creative lie, I would say. All the wisdom, values, ideologies, and so forth must be taught in the house, only in the house. You give only the best in the house, not outside the house. Whatever is passed outside the house is a creative lie. And that's what we should do. You know, the West have taught us, they have encouraged us to do away with our own traditional way of looking at things. They have invaded our space, and they came up with this creative lie. We are unpalangi, we are undeveloped, we are uncivilized. And for us to be civilized, we have to be like them. So we have to go back to the house. As my sisters have shared, you know, like, it's been there for all our lives. For example, if we talk about land preservation in Tuvalu, I will speak specifically for Waijupu, where I'm from. We have this atua called Momosia. Momosia is the supreme god that look after the whole island, the whole ocean, Moana, and so forth. And we have these small gods. One of those gods is called Moe Kilaupuka. That god specifically, his role and responsibility is to look after the land. So they have divide the whole island into 5 division or boundaries, or they call it tuakoi. To manage that division only came up with the idea of looking after, managing, and it's nothing to do with commercialization of land, nothing to do with profit and so forth. So this whole idea of looking after the land, for example, also in New Tao, another island, they have this concept of telinga, which totally affiliated with the spiritual beings. You know, if they put a tapu or they have forbidden this piece of land, for sure there will be some deity, some spiritual beings will look after that piece of land. So you are not allowed to solely or go past that land or to go and harvest that piece of land. So those methodology back in the past were used way before the arrival of Christianity. So we must revisit those values, those methodological values, in order for us to move forward. As my sisters have already been putting forward, we have to move forward, but we need to have that strong foundation. We have to look back and have that muno de fale, that relational. But some people nowadays, they start to abuse this type of relational thing, because I have this relationship with Frances, I can abuse her in the sense of sending many proposals to PCC to fund some project for Tuvalu. That sometimes we abuse that relationship, So relationship without love and justice, it's a myth. We need to have that relational, that relationship based on love and justice equals happiness. Happiness does not measure by monetary terms. It measures by the freedom that we have, the happiness that we have with one another. That relationship Yemaima talked about. Thank you, Francis.
Vinaka Maina. Susanna? Unmute.
So for me, I guess we cannot go back in time. We cannot reorganize history for our people and just expect our people to go back to the way we used to live. But what we can do is we can use whatever we have now. So we cannot get rid of the cash economy system we are living in. We cannot get rid of the political system, the educational system. But what we can do is we can use these systems to bring in life for humanity and also for our environment. We can sell our fish, considering that and knowing that the other person is also in need, and not putting the cost of your fish sky high so that you can get all the money from that person just for that person to eat one fish, for example. And so what we can actually do is make sure reviving our traditional cultures and values, as mentioned by Amaina, there should be love and justice inside, and these are some of the traditional values and spiritualities of our people. Back then, everything was based on love and respect, and we can use these values to create to use and apply them within the new systems that we have now, to make sure that we are giving life rather than taking life. Yeah, basically.
Thank you. I think we concluded those two questions with weaving in the two strands of the new and the old, and how we could better do this is basically now in our hands, learning from the past and moving forward, but also what we have seen or experience with a new system, and how best we can use these different strands of MET that we now have on our hands to weave in the future that we want, that as concluded by Susanna and Maina, the relationship that's based on love and justice. We now go to the question and answer session. We already have two questions for our panelists. Faye Tevi asked, as young leaders, you have given clear examples on what we should do. Our cultural understanding of development and our connectedness to our environment. what are 2 clear steps our national leaders ought to focus on to bring back our cultures to the center of our development paradigm? Maina, would you like to begin?
Okay. Basically, what we are doing now in Tuvalu, I will take that as a good example for now. Our leaders are basically this morning as well. They're discussing the foreign policy in Tuvalu, bringing in, merging, or weaving together our traditional values into that framework, and how best we can take those values to the international plane. You know, all countries have their own traditional cultures and traditional values, but how can we match those values into our foreign policies, and how best we can connect with the international communities through values? So right now they're discussing those values. So what I'm saying is that that's another good step forward. That, I mean, for the first time, our national leaders are talking about these values at the international plane. So what I'm saying is that it's a good step forward, because we are not just for the sake of the international community, but for the sake of our own people. We tend to understand what our leaders are talking about, what values they are talking about. And when they talk about love, peace, and all this, we understand where they stem from, where they come from, all from the house, from Muno de Fale. So we start to understand that, that relational connectedness, in the house. So when our leaders start speaking about this, start speaking at the international plane regarding different policies and so forth, negotiation and so forth, we from the islands are basically understanding what they are talking about at that international level. We know what they're talking about because they're feeding in our traditional values, our indigenous wisdom, and so forth. So that's one way or another we can move forward. So I think it's very encouraging to all other Pacific leaders as well, that they should also feed in, merge in those cultural values into their policies. And I think the government of Tuvalu are not just speaking specifically for their foreign policy. We are hoping that it will cross the board. It's not just about the foreign policy, but also in different types of policies, frameworks that can also bring our values to the table.
Thank you, Maina. Alicia, would you like to take on that question?
Do I? Do you want me to? What are 2 clear steps our national leaders ought to focus on to bring back our cultures to the center of our development paradigm? I think Maina has really sort of covered it. I mean, in terms of a region, right? Like, are we, which way are we facing, our leaders? Like, are we looking at the community and then working outwards to ensure that those needs are reflected so that internationally can be assisted? Or are we taking every international instrument and trying to bring it and round peg in a square hole it into our communities? Because that's sort of like people looking at it at a regional level. That's the thing, we rectify all these conventions, we sign up onto all of these international commitments, and they're wonderful commitments. They're very well based, in science and in the recognition that we need to, do all these steps in order to protect our environment. But then when it gets translated into our countries, into our communities, it doesn't work out the same way. There's a lack of understanding on that. And man, if I had to give 2 clear steps on how that would work, without shooting myself in the foot. So what can I say? I really strongly believe that there needs to be more conviction from our leaders on who we are, what we stand for, and to frame our narratives and our policies and what our region is reflecting, you know, to international bodies, to these spaces, when it comes to climate change, you know, environment, all these other things. And instead of just accepting it and trying to fit it here, we be firm and say, no, this is how this issue is faced. This is how we recognize here. This is the language that we use, even the language, that's such an important thing, you know? Not just English language, but convention language. You know, like those things, you know? And those can be like small key things that we can just tweak and we would be better placed. You know, I mean, like there are bigger steps that need to be taken, but if we could just do like one small thing like that, like revisit the language that we're using, ensuring that it's from inward going outward, instead of bringing it to us and trying to fit it in when it doesn't. Maybe those two things could really be helpful in the long term. Can you see?
Yeah, basically, I've already shared everything. I don't see. Yeah, next question maybe. Salma, would you like to respond to that question? We have some more questions.
Yeah, I think my Alicia and Mina have basically covered everything, and I totally agree that with reviving and recapturing our traditional knowledge and practices, like so we need to create awareness to our people and educational programs to let the people know about what we are going through, about the reality we are going through today. Like with the reality of climate change, the people need to see what the consequences of their actions are. Like, for example, like they need to see how our animal species and plant species are suffering from their anthropogenic actions. And like we can also, with the reviving of our culture and tradition, we can bring in all the values we to make sure that every development within our countries is for sustainability, for its sustainability. Yeah, and everything is basically covered by.
Kasana. Panelists, we have another question here from Vani Ratanasinga. Some of what the panelists have articulated are things I struggle to piece together as people prompt Vani to explain some of the response to development issues. The question is, how do we, as Pacific Islanders and Fijians, begin to bring some of these discussions into mainstream development discourse, planning and implementation? When and how? IEC.
Okay, maybe for Fiji, right? You know, we have our indigenous institutions, you know, the Itoke Affairs Board, Itoke Land Trust Board. We even have all of these companies that have been shared up, you know, that have like been birthed out of the successes of all these different things. And when we talk about discussions into mainstream development, you know, in the first question, I had talked a bit about land, yes. How we say we own 90-something% of the land. Mm-hmm. But how does that ownership translate in the ability to get capital to develop your land, to be entrepreneurs? And this was a discussion with Dr. Point Park in a Zoom discussion a few days ago, talking about how everything has been set up to have Fijians live in a perpetual state of subsistence farming. Yeah, you know, and that really like struck me, you know, because explaining that if you have Matangali land, you can't go to a bank and say, I have Matangali land, can I use that to get capital to start business? But if someone were to lease that land, they have that ability, right? You know. Mm-hmm. And when we're talking about these discussions, we should really reflect on these things first. How can we change those things first? And then we would be able to enter these discussions on economic development from a firm standpoint, I think. And only then would we be able to, because I think maybe there's a role to play, and I'm talking for Fiji, there's a role to play there by Indigenous institutions. You know, how would they be able to, I don't know, review things so that it is reflected that way? Maybe that's somewhere to begin. And the question on when, I really don't think that we should be invited anymore. We should stop waiting for an invitation, right? We just show up. Show up into these spaces and start knocking at doors and asking, you know, and this is a good way, I feel, to really open up people to this conversation and to see where they center themselves and how they can engage in this. You know, if we have these small ripple effects in different places, and this is Fiji, in Samoa, in Tuvalu, you know, FSM, all these other places across the Pacific, and even in the diaspora. Like, you know, there's so much power there. And, you know, how can we use that to make things better?
I'm still driving, but like, yeah, I think for me, to really bring back these discussions into mainstream development courses, and to also, when I'm trying to say bring back these discussions, I'm talking about you should actually, for me personally, I feel like it really starts within your own household. You know, the upbringing of your child, and from there, like, teaching your child on the mana of the land, the spirituality, the spiritual ties that we have connected to it. And I feel like from that, that's what really, that's what can help ground the child's foundation on how to respect and care for creation, you know, and then having within, like what you said, a ripple effect. With if each household was to have that, that can literally change a whole generation with their mentality that they have, right? And then from there, that's what can really bring back the bringing in these discussions. And then, because a lot of people, like, as I see today, the young people have such a powerful role. They also have a powerful voice in making change, you know, and also us as Pacific Islanders, our youth as well, they have the ability to reframe or like rethink our own development narratives. So I think from there, that's what I would say. And what else? Planning and implementation. When and how.
Mainstreaming.
Yeah. When and how, basically what RDC had said, we should really just stop waiting for an invitation, you know, we should just take on the own initiative as our own and start bringing in these discussions, helping to unpack and remap out what we want as a development narrative for our Pacific people.
Thank you, Maina. Maina? A question. You got the question?
No.
Okay. How do we as Pacific Islanders begin to bring some of the these discussions into mainstream development discourse, planning and implementation? When and how?
Okay, yes, thank you. It's very prominent especially nowadays when we talk about development and the good timing, you know, when and how we're going to talk about this new story of development within the context of the manifold struggles that we are facing at the time being. I think it's not about deciding when is the good time, But whenever you have the opportunity to bring that in, to weave that story in, either at the international community, the regional level, or even at your own at the national level. So it's about the opportunity. If we have that opportunity to do so, we should not, stop ourselves from conveying that message. We just go out and look for opportunity. If opportunity arises, we should hit there. We should not stop or move back. We need our voice to be heard. We are the future leaders, so we need our voice to be heard. So in whatever opportunities that we have, either in different setting, but we have to be very mindful of, especially when it comes to the national level, we should know our role and responsibility. When it comes to the community level, you have to have that sense of respect when it comes to engagement with your leaders, your traditional leaders. But once you have that opportunity to do so, yeah, please.
Sana?
Right. So I think as Maima said, it basically starts with us, and we should be the starting point of this new change, or whatever we have come up with to implement. And as for us, the Pacific, with all the current issues we are facing, it looks like our youth, our generation is actually standing up, doing whatever we can to make sure it stops for our future generations. And like, as Mina has mentioned, it may be hard for us, the youth, because we have this barrier between us and our elders. There's this respect that we have to, so we cannot just go up to them. But I think we also have a right, it is our right to participate. It is our right to participate and show our opinions on what we can do for the betterment of whatever we have in plan for implementing or frameworks for the future.
Thank you, Sana. Question from Isabella. Are there methods in place with your own communities to encourage the indigenous people to move towards sustainable methods of farming, considering we are historically subsistence farmers and have only just started to begin commercially farming as a collective? So we are not as well versed or prepared to preserve our land on a large scale if we were to use it as an individual for profit-making purposes. Are there methods in place with your own communities to encourage indigenous people to move towards sustainable farming methods? Eh? Who would like to go first?
Are there any methods in place? So I feel like right now, ever since COVID-19 had happened, a lot of, I've seen the situation in Fiji, how the Ministry of Agriculture has started to support many households by giving out seeds for families to start up their own subsistence farm, right? Even with us here in PCC, we have our food bank that we had just started not long ago. And I feel like that's what has really helped us go back to that subsistence way of living instead of going to the supermarket and buying something that has been imported from New Zealand, and when you can just plant it in your own backyard.
I think I understand where the question is coming from.
Yeah.
And as far as my awareness is, it's new territory. Collective entrepreneurship, right? Like, there's, okay, maybe in the Western context of having a company and shareholders, but, and again, as I mentioned, but the indigenous institutions that do that, Fijian holdings, unit trust and all that, we hear about it, we see the buildings, but we don't really make the connection to our Matagali land, and how we can also have those processes at that level. And I think that's really a conversation we can also delve into, because I don't have the answer. I mean, like, I wish it was that way. I wish, those things were set up. But as far as I'm aware, not really. Maybe there are communities out there that are doing things like that. Cooperatives had come up, and then it goes into this typical phrase of, oh, and we really need to move away from those things and really relook at those models and how it can fit into our reality today, because it's possible.
Yes, I feel like with methods like when you go out to rural areas, they're all, even though what I had mentioned before on the COVID-19, how a lot of locals here within the urban area have started their own subsistence farming. But then when you go out to the rural areas, a lot of the locals, when they carry out their agricultural practices or the subsistence farming, they still hold that knowledge, that indigenous knowledge and indigenous practices to conservation when it comes to conserving or going amidst to their agricultural sector. And I feel like the government should really stop going into communities and bringing in a lot of methods from a very Eurocentric methods of conservation, when really you can also have conversations or discussions with communities on their indigenous practices, reviving those practices and stuff. I feel like with those methods and bringing them back into the communities, that can also really help maintain or sustain the indigenous knowledge for future generations to come forth. And, it can also help as my next said, reframe or going back to our old, our old normal.
Maina?
Yeah, our old normal is stress-free, no insurance to pay, no hospital to go to. We have our own traditional healers. So it's basically a stress-free concept of understanding of things. Well, basically, when we come to the issue of sustainable development or sustainable farming, I would say that in Waidupu, where I'm from, basically we have divided the island into 4 specific areas, and those areas must be protected and must be respected. We call that concept pono potu. Literally means to shut or to close the rooms, literally. So if the chief of the island says they are going to close Matangi and Sanyuta, meaning that no one will allow to go and either go to that plantation site of Matangi and Sanyuta. You have to respect that area for 2 or 3 months, allowing the nuts to germinate, allowing the coconut tree to regeminate, and and also to our bulaka pits, those giant taros. So those are the 2. I'm speaking from a context where unfertile soil, our soils are not rich like the Fijian soil, the Samoans and the Tongans. We're just like the people from Kiribati, poor soil. So we have that mentality of tangata whenua. We live on our lands. We come up with very innovative, creative mindset in order for us to survive. It's about struggling. It's about hardship. It's not about poverty, as I said. It's just about struggling. How, if point A does not work, you go to B. If B does not work, you go to C. So that's how we manage our, in order for us to sustain our very limited resources that we have to accept the fact that we either respect and protect those particular areas that have been, those designated areas that have been appointed by the island chiefs. So we also have this concept called tapui. I think it's also either influence or Samoa missionary came with that concept, or we influenced them and they took it back to Samoa. It's either way around. We call it tapui. Tapu literally means to forbid or prohibit, and ui means to go past or walk past. So if you see that special coconut leaves are being tied around a coconut tree or a pandanus tree, it literally means the one who owns that particular tree is telling you not to rob that tree, not to harvest it. You have to abide and you have to respect that simple sign. So that's one way or another, managing our own or conserving our own produce in the island. So you have to respect that. Once you see that, and it literally means, like, if you look at the tapui, you can literally see that it defines by specific weaving or tying. So you literally, if you see that, you will basically know it belongs to that specific family. So those few concepts, and also I think people from Samoa, Tonga, and Fiji have similar way of looking after and managing their own resources. Like for us, the umanga, the waniu, and moana, these three comes together. We cannot separate moana from the land. We cannot separate the heaven from the moana and from the land. We cannot separate the coconut trees, the fruits from the land or from the sea. Whatever it affect or impact the land, it will also impact the moana. So if we close this particular designated place or area, like for Matangi and Sanyuta, literally means that part of that ocean or that moana is also forbidden. You're not allowed to fish there. So these people are very clever, way before the Palangi came into the Pacific. And I think we should teach them now.
Thank you, Maina. Sana?
Yeah, well, there are methods used within my community. Well, basically, there's a lot of rich ecological traditional knowledge and farming methods in particular. We have agroforestry. We also have fallowing. So fallowing is like leaving the land for a period of time so that like the soils can have time to restore for the next cultivation of land. There's also mulching, which is like this is like a traditional way. I think it's practiced everywhere where people add different layers of soil to make sure that their farm grows well and healthy and stuff. We also have multi-cropping. There's multi-cropping or intercropping. This is like with climate change and knowing that our islands are very vulnerable and prone natural disaster impacts. So they have come up with farming methods that are good for us to, that are like able for us to be resilient to these challenges. And so these include multi-cropping, like people plant not only one crop, but there's like different types of species, so of plant species planted, so that if like the cyclones affect one of the crops, they're able to use the other crops planted. It's like their backup plan. So like yeah, so it's practiced within our community here in Samoa, and like people, I think it's just based on how people know that they are prone to these climate change impacts. So they come up with these traditional farming methods to like get back to these challenges. There's also the very simple one, which is afforestation. Like if we are cutting down trees, deforestation, if we are cutting down trees and for our own benefits, then at the same time, we should also plant trees for the next time we need them, instead of like just cutting them down all the time and stuff.
Thank you, Sana. We have a question from Joe. The predominant way in which climate change is discussed a global narrative is almost always through a political, ideological lenses. How can spirituality and faith add a new lens to the climate discussions and depth to our approach to the issue? I listen. Because it starts with A. I'm alphabetical now.
Okay. Oh my God. Hey, Joe. You know, I think a part of it. I think there's these two ways to look at it. There is the spiritual, that is the physical church, and how it has impacted humanity globally, when they tried to take, the word of God everywhere, and the impacts that it had, and how it has, gosh, this is a big conversation, how it has taken resources from people, how it has taken people's right to self-determination, identities, all these things, in this process. And, that's sort of the physical realm of the conversation of how spirituality, and I think a great example would be the Catholic Church and how it has moved forward with trying to divest and all these things, trying to move away from all the ways that it has been implicated in this process, and trying to, what's the word? Find justice, or repent. How do you say it? That's the spirit, the physical realm of how the church and spirituality plays a role in this climate conversation. Divestment from fossil fuels and investing in all of these corporations that continue to engage in extractives and mining. And then there's the other layer that we talk about when we say 90% of land. There's nothing, but there's actually this other spirituality that we really need to look into, about taking ownership of our spiritual identity in this climate conversation, and having that ability to connect our animism, our totems, and all these things into the discussions at a global level, that we really need to advocate and push that this be recognized, the relationships that we see of all these things being beings, our oceans, our land, and everything, and how they should be viewed in that way, and that we also, when we're negotiating in these things, that we're looking through that lens as well. Maybe those are the two ways to look at it.
Thank you, Lucy. Mayena, would you like to respond?
Okay, Joe, thank you so much, Joe, for the question. I was with Joe last year, and also with the most Reverend James Bhagwan from PCC. We were together in Madrid during COP 2025. Yeah. So there's a saying: if you don't find your voice on the table, you should find somewhere else. So that's what we normally do when we go to these big meetings, the Conference of the Parties, or the UNFCCC climate change negotiation meetings. So we set up this side event. And our side events last year, I invited Reverend James Bhagwan, the Right Honorable Enele Sopoanga from Tuvalu, and also Anotetong, and also the poet from the Marshall Islands. So, and Joe actually moderated the session last year. And the session was called Not Without My Neighbor. And I crafted that theme specifically to bring in, I kept on saying we crafted the theme to bring in this theological, spiritual, and what else? The flavor into the discussion of climate change that is always missing. We tend to go to this type of meetings having this mindset of negotiation. We go on the table, we can negotiate with leaders and so forth. But we always forget to use those biblical, theological knowledge, very limited, that we have to bring on to the table of the negotiation table. So what we did last year, we crafted the theme of the workshop or the side event as Not Without My Neighbor, specifically focusing on the neighborly love, on the parable of the Good Samaritan. So, and what was so, I should say here, is that during that conversation or the discussion, the government of Australia responded to that specific conversation. The Prime Minister of Australia respond after our discussion to what James Buckwan have said. You know, although we love him as our brother, as our Christian brother, but we have been beaten and left us dead on the road, just like the Good Samaritan story. So the whole thematic or whole idea behind the side event was based on that faith aspect of the Good Samaritan. And we don't want to limit that to as a moral story. So that's how, Joe, we can fit in. You know, it's not just about climate change negotiation. Whatever or wherever we go, we can always fit in our very limited knowledge of theology and biblical understanding of small stories and short stories of the Bible and fit it in, merge it in. And because the issue of neighbor, when we discuss the issue of tuakoi or tuaoi in the Samoan understanding, it's literally the Muslim brothers and sisters, the Islamic, they will basically understand what we're talking about. At the geopolitical level, we are bringing in that flavor of spiritual understanding, faith aspect of things. And I should stop there, I'm preaching here.
Nakamaina. Sana, would you like to respond? No?
I think as people of faith, we should look at the planet as something that was given to God by us, and like that's how we should look. Well, our planet is currently facing environmental issues, and I think we need to see it as a creation, and like we were put on this planet to be responsible for our Earth. So we're responsible for like protecting it, and we're supposed to be caring stewards towards God's creation. And I think it applies like as Mina said, our very limited theological knowledge. We can apply it within our actions in what we do, and like to help conserve and protect it from the issues that it's facing right now.
Nakasana. We'll go to our final question as time is catching up on us. From Daphne. With the rise of gender-based violence in the Pacific and the argument around culture and religious beliefs, what is your opinion on cultural spirituality? And is the so-called patriarchy systems and the patriarchy culture to be blamed? Gender-based violence in the Pacific and the argument around culture and religious beliefs.
Thanks, Daphne, for the question. So to me, when it comes to gender-based violence, I feel like a lot of our Pacific people, the reason why there's such a high high level of gender-based violence within our Pacific communities is because they have taken the wrong conception of how women were made, like when it comes to like Christianity, because women were made from the rib of a man. They have taken that and used it with the wrong ideology that women were made to serve men. You know, they're inferior to men. I had gone, there's a lot of discussions on that, and I had attended this workshop on statelessness and gender equality. It was in February, and one of the pastors there, they had said this really nice statement where he said, I think it's really common around in the Pacific, as we heard it as well, that since the women were made from the rib of the man, they were created from the rib of the man. They were not created from the man's head, or for women to trample over, or like they were also not made from the man's foot to be trampled over, but by the men. But the rib, which was on the side of the man, since the women were made from the rib, which is on the side of the man, that means that they were made to be seen as equals. The placement of the rib, which is right under the man's hand, meaning that the women are to be protected by men due to its placement, which is protected by their arms. Yes. So when I'm looking at Christianity through that, that's what I really like to see. And when it comes to culture, in Samoa, we have this word which we define a relationship between a brother and a sister, Alfeanaila. And with that, we have this sacred relationship, or that sacred bond, which we call Batapuia. We can also use this concept when we're talking about human and their relation, or their sacred bond with their land. This whāinga is really, really important within our Samoan culture, and is what grounds the respect between a brother and a sister, and how you should respect that respect that you share between each other. You guys are not meant to be violent towards each other. You guys have that mentality of respect where you guys value each other's presence. You guys are both equals and so forth. That's how I would explain it, yeah.
Ooh, man, I saw that question. It was like gender-based violence, religion, culture, patriarchy. Oh my goodness. I think to really maybe just in a nutshell, what we really want is equality and equity.
Yeah.
You know? And this patriarchal system, you have to look at it cross-cutting, right? It centers the male, the cisgendered, male, white man, and then there's this hierarchy of it coming down, and then everyone else, is around that center, and that's incorrect. And the way I view it is in the way of your culture, where we have our different traditional roles.
Yeah.
And how I understand our traditional roles as clans, to our tribe, is that you have the fishermen, you have the warriors, you have the builders, the architects, you have the scientists, all these different things, the spiritual, the method. And they all work together to identify a chief. And them identifying the chief doesn't mean the chief rules over everyone. It means we recognize you as our leader, and through our expertise and what we can do, we will help you, support you in your role to govern our people. And that gets abused over and over again in every system, and it's the same here. There's absolutely no difference. This patriarchal system where the man, through Christianity, has centered the man, and then we're all supposed to be in support, but it's gotten to this point where it's become abusive, where you think because you have married a woman and you've laid umudi, a bride price, a dowry, that you own her as property. That is incorrect. Yeah. And what needs to be done is to unpack these things and what it means, and have the conversation again from the family level. And I think that's also how you can, lean into that question of how do we make sure these skills, this understanding, this indigeneity is not lost. We need to continue to have these conversations, and we really need to make use of technology. It's wonderful that we have an oral tradition, but we can now record stories, we can now write stories, and we have learned how to write and record and use these platforms. We really should use these platforms to also record, not only broadly this way, but also within our own families, within our own structures at the lower communal level. And that would be a good place for us to do this work, to start off.
Thank you, Alice.
Yeah.
Sana, Maina, Would you like to respond?
Well, it's a bit hard to relate because the patriarchal system in Samoa is not really as it seems like. It's not really a patriarchal system as some people might say or argue. It's basically a functional society where everyone has a role to play in. So like it can't be a patriarchal system if even the Matais have their own responsibilities to do, even the chiefs have their own responsibilities like in looking after the other people. So people serve them and they do their part as serving as well. But looking at gender-based violence, there, as Maima has stated, we have the whiangainga, and that is between the sister and the brother. And like the respect should be there, and like obviously violence shouldn't be there as well. But there's but then I guess it goes both ways as well, because when many people are just assuming that it's only the female being abused by males, but there's also the males can also be emotionally abused by the females, and that's something that not everyone knows. And I guess we can look at how we can like this patriarchal system, like people are automatically saying that there is violence because of this male dominant view. But I guess we can use these traditional cultural knowledge that we had back then. For instance, as we have mentioned, the whiangainga, we can use that to, but it also applies to the female side. Traditionally, we have we are supposed to have our roles as the saugoes, but like that person is like carrying the sacredness of virginity. So like it's her herself. It really depends on what situation she puts herself in. Like she can be allowing herself to be in to keep going back to these abuses, but people don't know that. So it basically she should be like reviving her cultural traditions, like such as mentioned.
Thank you, Sandra. So we'll go for another. Oh, Maina.
We need the middle.
Yes, I'll keep it short. Basically, I will go, in terms of gender violence, or we will have to go back to the house. The house is very important. Our house back in the days, even up to now, we live in open houses. No fancy romantic doors and glasses or windows. We have this bola, the shades. Your problems are my problems. Whatever happens in the house, we were exposed. We can hear them. Our houses are just next door to them. Nothing to hide. And what is going on now in the Pacific, we want to be, we have to identify ourselves to determine who we are, our status and so forth by the monetary values that we have, the money, the finance, building a nice house for Francis, Momo, it gives you credit, it gives you a status in a community, But that's something totally different. That's why the population in Tuvalu and so forth start to grow. Why? Because we have locked doors, we have rooms. But back in the days, we don't have those rooms. We don't have windows, we don't have locked doors. Our problems, our domestic problems are exposed all the time. And we can hear them. If they want to eat, in Tuvalu, if you crack a coconut in the house, it literally means you are hungry. You don't have food on the table. That's why you can't crack the coconut in front of the people. You eat the coconut in the bush, not in your valley. It's a sign that you need food. So people will come with food. So all this idea of domestic violence and all this, they're either new or being there, but not, we don't want to talk about it. But most of the problem are being exposed. Why? Because we have open houses, no windows, no doors. And that understanding of romantic is still a bit far distant from us. That's why population was still very low back then, Francis. Now it's climbing up, it's skyrocketing. So we have to rethink those very simple, specific understanding of looking at things, especially in the Fale. You know, when we talk about the Fale, we're talking about love, wisdom, relationship, as Yamaima talked about. And that real relationship, you know, I will teach my kids not to abuse their wife or the husband or whatever in the house, not in the basketball court, not in the field, it's in the house. Why? Because that's where wisdom and love comes from. It's not from the playing field. And if we talk about this Adam and Eve story from the Jewish people, we also have our own traditional story about Vau and Pai, who created the island of Nanumea. They're all women, no men. So we need to rethink, reweave and our story and try to look at where does abuse comes from. We in our tradition, we don't separate the women and the men. You know, they sit on the post and we sit outside. No, it's just because of, she was talking about the Feangainga. Feangai, ainga. Feangai means to face. Ainga means family. Family comes together and face one another. But in Tuvalu, we put the men in front and the women sit at the back. It's not because we want to abuse them or look at them as, you know, very low status in society. No, it's just the women have that pride of having their brothers in front and they are from behind. They take care of their brothers. They have that pride. Thank you.
Thank you, Maina. We'll go for another 10 minutes when we have 2 questions here for our panelists before we wrap up. The first question, if I may, what efforts are being taken to have climate change implemented in your individual country's education system? That's the first question. And the second question, Sana spoke about a separation of systems, which is, in my opinion, somehow has influenced our development story. As young people, how do we deal with this, or what can we do to ensure that the in-house knowledge and skills, traditional knowledge, is not lost in framing our development story?
I think I'll answer the second question. So Sana had spoken on how the Eurocentric development narrative brings in a lot of individualism, right? And so when it comes to trying to, sorry, what's the question? Hold on. Yeah, so when it comes to trying to ensure how this traditional knowledge does not get lost in framing our development story, I feel as though, just as what Maina said, it starts within the household, right? Everything starts within the household. Upbringing your kids, bringing back that culture of giving, or what my dad likes to call an economy of sharing, you know, what Sana had spoken on when it comes to going out and catching fish or and coming back and sharing it with your community. My grandpa had done the same thing. When he was alive, he would either go out to fish, or we also owned a subsistence farm, and then from there, every time they would harvest the crop, so they would bring it back. What his catch or what he would collect from the farm would be distributed out to the whole community, you know, the economy of sharing. And then everything will be distributed, and what's left with your family will either be nothing or something like small, you know. It's that love, that reciprocal love, that respect that we have for each other. And I feel like that really starts within the household. The upbringing of your kids, teaching them the values of sharing and giving. You know, us in the Pacific, our cultures are so unique. This economy of sharing that we have is present within each Pacific culture. You know, something is carried out in Samoa can also be similar to what the Fijian cultures have, as well as the Tuvaluan culture. So, you know, that's my answer to that. Alicia, would you like to?
Oh my goodness. So traditional knowledge, like that in-house knowledge. I think, again, the answer has been coming up with mine and all of us, like beginning at home with the family, and ensuring that when we are having these discussions, that the nuances are not lost. I saw a question earlier that probably won't have time to really delve into, asking about why do you think your ancestors accepted Christianity? I don't think there's a broad answer for everyone. It really comes down to how different geographies, the politics, the tribal warring, and the relationships, who was stronger, and how they had to align this side or this side in order to protect themselves. And I think those were, part of the decision making around, okay, we will go this way, we will align because Raksabakambao was stronger and he has aligned to Christianity and we want to be protected or something, there's that. And there's probably others who really from a spiritual perspective have the luxury of saying, yeah, we recognize that spirituality and we align with these values that are being told to us, and we're happy to get into that. I think it's very different across, across Asia, across the Pacific as well. And when, and then that conversation happening in your family, understanding how within the smaller unit you went into the steps, that's a conversation to be held as well, because that and grounding yourself in that, and it'll help you, make decisions and continuing to share the stories with your family and have these conversations every day. That's how I was growing up with my family, hearing the stories about our history and our culture and everything, and now it's coming to our level. And I think that's what we can do to ensure that it's not lost. And also recognizing that some of our historical records and oral stories are not accurate, and that there are other ways we can reference them, to make sure that it's the right story and not to be pushed by our own perception of how we wanted our history to be.
Yeah. When you're talking about us, the question that was given on why our ancestors had accepted Christianity, I feel like for me personally, I feel like they had accepted Christianity because our indigenous spirituality is so similar to how Christianity is set out as well. When it comes to Christian beliefs, we have, it speaks a lot on relationality as well as a holistic well-being of others, and what I had mentioned before on seeing beyond what you see, having that faith with us in our indigenous spirituality, and having faith for Christians as well, to fellowship with God. I feel like that's what our ancestors had, why our ancestors found interest in adopting Christianity for themselves, and that's why Christianity plays such a huge role and gives so much support on when talking about the reciprocal love culture, because it all comes, it all intertwines and weaves in with Christianity as well, indigenous spirituality and Christianity both together.
Thank you. Maina?
Francis, are we trying to answer the question from Mema Motusanga, or is it a different question?
Yes, yes, two questions.
Okay.
One on climate change, whether climate change has been implemented in your individual country's education system. Another one is on, as young people, how do you deal with this? Or what can we do to ensure that house knowledge or traditional knowledge is not lost in the framing of our development story? Okay, the first bit, it's about has climate change implemented in our education system and so forth. I'm not really sure at the moment, but in the past they have discussed that, and I'm sure it's part of a curriculum and so forth. For now, even in the church, they came up with this, the issue of climate change and how they will merge into their Sunday school syllabus. So I think those little piece of bits are there, and I'm not sure whether they have implemented it or not. But when it comes to, I think it's about, is it about the governance system you asked about,
the governance system. And because you know, in the past, or every island or every community, they have their own governance, traditional governance system. And it's so fun. In the past few days, I was looking into this democratic governance system, you know, like the separation of power, which Alicia talked about, you know, the executive, the judiciary, and the legislative. And also, if you put that in, for example, in Maitupu, we have this matafale, which they elect their chiefs. And then as the executive, they will pass on to the Lukunga or Aliki. That's a different house of clan. They will examine, assess whether you is qualified to be a chief or not. And if you are qualified, they will pass it down to the Tausoa, or the traditional meeting hall, or the legislative in the Western concept of democratic governance. So we have this system way before the arrival of the West, of the Western either missionaries or these British people. That separation of power, you know, it's what is nice about it is that these people, our elders in the village, you know, they never exposed to internet or school or read any books, but they have this separation of power mindset, you know. You cannot select, endorse, and then implement. They have this particular house or particular matafale or house clans. They will select their own chiefs, and then they will pass it on to Lukunga, another different house, which hold a role and responsibility to assess, examine, and if you are passed, and then they will pass it down to the traditional meeting hall or the Tausoa. So they have this different separation of power. They decide, they examine, and they implement. So we just need to revisit them. Just go back and revisit those traditional governance system that we have in the past. They are more practical than the Western idea of governance system. Thank you.
Right. So in answering the second question, thank you, Memo, for the questions. So yeah, so as young people, there is a lot of things that we can do to actually make sure that these in-house knowledge is recaptured. So like first of all, us young people knowing that that the issue is there, that our traditional knowledge is slowly fading, what we can do is basically voice our concerns. Like, you know, we can like make sure that we are letting other people know. Like, for example, like I think one of the best things about knowing these issues at a young age is that we are able to have the chance to go and converse with our family elders, our community elders, and I think getting more knowledge about everything. We are like the perfect people to start already with what we can do to make sure it's all brought back. There's also the implementations of workshops and conferences and like REM, for an example, with the youth engagement. I guess that is one of the most influential ways for us to know and like we get to hear our elders' stories, we get to hear their concerns for the future, knowing that they're relying on our generation for the future. And like, this is the best way for us to learn traditional knowledge, and like we learn more and more, and then we do our own part with creating awareness and educational programs. Like, it's the smallest things we can do within our communities. There's youth, there's Sunday schools. We can like use these gatherings as an opportunity to like talk about the importance of our knowledge and why it should be kept and why we shouldn't lose it. We can use, there's also public lectures, public presentations. There's so many ways we can voice our concerns on the newsletters or like through social media. I think the main problem is like not everyone knows due to the rise of urbanization, and everyone is focusing on that point where we are focusing on globalization and the westernized mentality of how things should be. And like with people being urbanized, there's no chance for us to be within our rural communities, our rural families. And like, this is where we can learn about traditional knowledge. And I guess it goes around playing our own parts within our families, our communities, our churches. It's the smallest things we can do. And like for knowing about this issue of our traditional knowledge fading, I guess we should like start now, especially at a young age, to do whatever, whether it is learning more from our elders or teaching the young ones. It's all it all should be like happening at the same time.
Yeah. We're going to wrap up now with the last question to our panelists from Faye. If you can identify some practical measures for our way forward. Yes.
Okay, yes. This is our wrap-up, right? And thank you, Fra, thank you, Rev, for this opportunity. You know, I guess before we wrap up again, I just wanted to reiterate what I said in the beginning, that this is centered around me, my experiences, the family I grew up in, you know, the education system, and those are the basis for my views and the sharing that I put forward what I've learned from my family and from my community, and that PG isn't homogenous. There are different experiences, different understandings of the concepts that we've shared. And I just wanted to remind everyone of that again. And also one practical experience, you know, now that we're talking in the now, right, what we're doing, for us, it's the important thing for us was our province more, how we as urbanites, the diaspora of our own country, no longer living in our village, but having been away with our knowledge and our understanding, how can we give back? We formed a group and then we communicate ad hoc, you know, it's loose, but it's all this group of people from Alvano, we're connected that way. And we are focused on particularly helping our Alvano more. And then when there are needs that arise, how can we navigate? How can we work together to pool resources to help with our experiences and knowledge to help Alvano back as per their request, you know, what they identified. I think that's, for me, a practical way. I see other young groups doing the same thing around climate change, around education, you know, around agriculture. And I share that because I am a part of it and I see that it works. And again, groundswell. When you have all these different things coming up, working so passionately in an area that you really want to impact on, you know, the ripple effects like this.
Thank you, Lucy.
Yeah, I'll go like really fast. I'll just say one and be straight to it. Basically, practical measures to move forward is to really stop trying for our Pacific Island political leaders to really stop trying to bring in a very Eurocentric development narrative and to try and make our own narrative, you know, reframing, like what we had said, reframing or rethinking our old normal, going back to that economy of sharing and where we share multiple relationships with not only just us based on the human community, but also where we share multiple relationships with our land, the ancestral spiritual ties, our oceans, the trees, and so forth, you know. And I feel like that, and then starting from there, also starting within the household and the upbringing of your child, and what Sana had also mentioned as well on on what she had just mentioned not that long ago on what did she say again? I had just said that was the best. That's basically a practical measure right there. Yeah, what was she?
Going back to
your
family.
Going back to your family after you're going and having that bond with your the elders of your community. Going back to that community of giving, economy of sharing, bringing back that whole reciprocal relationship between the family, between each and every,
Well, basically for me, the way forward is very simple and clear. We need to go back to the valley.
Yeah.
Go back to our home. What we do and how we live our lives, our behavior and so forth, it's just a reflection. It's a mirror of where you come from. It's a mirror of the house. How you behave, how you talk, how you sit, how you walk. It's just a reflection of the house. Your attitude towards people, your attitude towards creation, your attitude towards Moana, your attitude towards environment and so forth. It's just a reflection of the house. You know, it's people who, oh, he comes from that house. That's where he belongs. Your attitude within the church, your attitude within the organization and so forth, it's a reflection of where you come from. It's a reflection of that wisdom that impart in you. It's run through our blood. So if we do something to disgrace and bring shame to our family, that's up to you. But what we were taught in the house, we must not disgrace our family. We must not bring shame to the family. That's the guiding principle for all indigenous knowledge. It's about sharing. It's about love. It's about when you catch fish today, you share with your tuago, your neighbor. When they go to the bush tomorrow, they will share with you the next day. That's how life, very simple, stress-free, no bills to pay, no telephone bills, no Vodafone bills, no texting, no Facebook back in those days, no stressing. Our own problems are confined to our national standard of living. It's whose store might expose their problems to me. Nowadays, we have Facebook, we have media. The COVID-19 happens in China and we are here in Tuvalu. We are part of the problem. We hear the news, it creates that stress environment because we are exposed to everything. But if we go back to the valley, sit down with our parents, sit down with a grandma, lie on their arms at nighttime before they sleep, and they start telling all those stories, those very stories that really shape who we are now. We call it in Tuvalu, and I'm sure also in Samoa, there are a lot of moripo, that loves that pass through during nighttime. It's love, nothing else. It's not about commercial activities. It's not about how tomorrow you go to the shop and this is how you do your banking. This is how you do those financial management. No, it's about our story back in the past, how we live peacefully with creation, how we live peacefully with God and so forth. So that's my contribution for today. Our way forward is just to go back to the house. Seek the wisdom of the house and allow that wisdom to be part of who you are and who I am today. And then we can sail smoothly forward. Manuia Deaso, Faraftai, Francis Namomo, thank you everyone.
Sana?
Right, so as Maina and Alicia have said, I agree with everything that they have said. Like, it's basically about going back to our roots. But I think the topic of our of this project right here is our answer. Like, this is like rethinking development in the Pacific and reweaving this Pacific. And like looking at rethinking of the development, there are many new visions of this new development that Pacific people have that are not heard. And I think if people are aware of these different visions of development, it would help a lot with going forward. So like there's seeing development as like instead of seeing development as who has the most GDP every year, we can like focus on like development and the general well-being of the people, the development, looking at how human rights are violated, development of those that are marginalized, those that are discriminated. We can focus on development through so many things. It could, so like that's development for the justice of people. There's also development for a sustainable environment, like that's us protecting our environment as well, especially knowing that we have spiritual and cultural connections to our environment. This is the main important reason why we are supposed to look at development that way. So I think all these development visions that we have, it's good to like let people know about it and like raise awareness more about it. And like, there are so many, with the issues that we are currently going through, there are so many writings. People are just writing articles. People are just writing articles, writing stories in newspapers, publishing books, but there's like yet no action about it. All these words that are written down about these challenges, they're all useless if there's no action. And I think that's what we should do. We should start acting with what we say. Like if we are like talking about conservation of an environment, talking about our human rights to make sure they're not undermined, I think we should start with ourselves with acting on these implementations and stuff we're coming up with.
Thank you, Sana. Again, thank you very much to our panelists, Maima, Alisi, Maina, and Sana, who have actually shared some wisdom, practical ways, learning from our past, and practical ways of moving forward. I hope we have all learned and we are all agitated to do something or to be part of this continuing conversation. Please join us again next week on Friday, same time, from 11 to 1 for another webinar series on changing the story. Again, from us, Vinaka Kalevu, to all our viewers, attendees, and our panelists, and thank you, Reverend James Bagwan, for hosting us today. Vinaka.
Thank you.